Hello and welcome to the first ever Nedbank Private Wealth Professional Report, a show for professionals like you who want to understand a bit more about the wealth management business and the benefits that it can bring you and your clients, as well as what it's like working with a wealth management company like Nedbank Private Wealth. Joining us today are Head of Business Development, Andrew Simpson, Senior Wealth Planner, Adrian Crowe, and Paraplanner, Anna Slater, who will be breaking down what wealth planning actually means. And then Andrew's going to be joined by Ross Hayworth, who is a family business advisor and director of the Quest for Legitimacy, which explores the unique experiences faced by people who come from backgrounds where their parents or their grandparents are really high achievers, highly successful, or perhaps particularly prominent. Unsurprisingly, this can bring a lot of pressure onto that rising generation and indeed their parents. So we're going to explore the role that professional advisors can play. And we're going to end with a Q&A, so please do send in your questions throughout the show for Adrian and Andrew using the panel on your screen. But first, wealth planning, what is it? And why is it something that you should know more about? To help us find out, I'd like to welcome Anna, Andrew and Adrian. So welcome everybody. It's great to see you all. Now, Andrew, I think we're going to start with you because we are going to be talking about this exciting, and I've been promised that it's exciting, so no pressure everybody, world of wealth planning. So let's start with this. Why is it worthwhile talking to a professional audience? Because don't those people already have quite a good idea about wealth planning and what it involves?
Well, yes, it's a fairly safe assumption, but you know what they say about assumptions. And I think it's worth sort of highlighting that there's only a very small percentage of the population that work in financial services. And everyone outside of that fairly small percentage, it's not their area, they're not experienced in it. And I think there's a lot of phrases within financial services that can seem quite similar, can come across quite similarly, like investment planning or wealth planning. And I think that's what creates a lot of confusion.
Okay, so those people, they might have a really good idea, broadly speaking, but they're not the experts.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is that if you talk to different firms that offer wealth planning, those different firms very often will offer wealth planning in different ways.
Okay.
And so unless you actually speak to each individual firm, it's very often difficult to know what the actual offer is.
Yeah, fair enough. And I suppose as a seasoned professional, it could feel a little bit odd to ask the question, what exactly is wealth planning then? Maybe people sort of don't almost want to say that out loud.
Yeah, mainly because it covers such a huge range of things and because, as Adrian touched on, the way a particular wealth planner or way a firm approaches it will be very different, and therefore the plan will be very different.
Right. So there's almost a challenge for the client. It's like, well, who do I trust? Where do I go? Why would I go with them versus somebody else if it's all so different? So is it also slightly about finding a firm that you feel aligned to or you like their values? Okay, so Anna, let's go to you now. Do you find that this is a particular issue for younger professionals?
Yes, I mean, we know that the next generation private client professionals can sometimes feel as though they're less experienced, less knowledgeable compared to their more experienced colleagues. We actually saw this firsthand in an event we ran recently, which was a masterclass for how to read a wine list. And the thought behind this was to help build confidence when maybe taking clients out at the first time you've ever had to choose a wine for a table you might be expected to. And actually, from speaking to people after this event, we found that it can actually be quite a daunting experience to take the challenge on if you're not very versed with doing so. So following this event, we actually decided to establish our Nedbank Private Wealth Next Generation Network.
I think that's really, I was actually talking about the wine thing with a friend the other day, and it is, everybody has a sort of theory of how to do it, but based perhaps on not very much. It's very, very interesting. So tell us a little bit about this event.
Yeah, so the Nedbank Private Wealth Next Generation Network, which we've aptly titled NedGEN, is, as I said, just a way to connect fellow like-minded next generation client professionals in an engaging setting by running quarterly events, but by also having mutual areas of interest conversation through channels such as LinkedIn. We know that by engaging the next generation, it's good for self-development as an individual, but also for the progression of our industry as a whole. So please do get in contact if you'd like to be part of our network.
And this is it online or is this in real life?
So the events will be real life, but
Nice.
we'll also, have virtual events and have conversations online as well that people will engage in.
It's good. There's a sort of social aspect to it
Yeah,
as
exactly.
well. Yeah, brilliant. So it sounds like a really, really good initiative, helping young people who are at the start of their careers to sort of do that networking. And that's good for clients as well, of course. But moving over to you, Adrian, as a wealth planner, what is the simplest way to describe your role? Can you really sort of boil it down for people? And why should people have a wealth plan?
Gosh, yeah. I think the simplest way of defining what my role is really to help individuals put a plan in place that takes them from where they are now to wherever it is that they want to be over whatever time frame that it is.
Yeah.
And I think a wealth plan is important because it almost starts the process as a family of having that discussion about what are your goals and objectives? What do you want your life to look like over whatever time frame it might be? What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And I think that wealth plan then helps you almost define your purpose in life and the effect that your finances have in helping you to achieve whatever those objectives are.
Do you ever have clients who are like, I have been so busy, I actually have never had time to think about this stuff because I'm on the sort of treadmill of life and being busy. So perhaps just from a different angle, it's quite good to take that pause and have a think about it.
Yeah, always see that all the
Do you?
time.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost part of my job is to start asking those thought-provoking questions that there's not necessarily an immediate answer to, but they can go away over the weekend or whatever it is, take time as a family to start having those kind of discussions.
That's really good. Somebody asked me recently, what do you think you'll be doing in 5 years? And I just went blank. I don't know what I'm doing next week. So tell us some of your thoughts on this, Andy. Would you say that perhaps wealth planning is connected to lots of different aspects of a client's life?
Absolutely. And I think what it does is it brings together every single element of someone's life that will affect their wealth.
Okay.
And that's huge. And it's what Adrian and Anna's team do. They bring together all the sort of the wider areas beyond just what are your investments doing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it provides that little bit of purpose and clarity over finances to know exactly what you own, but more importantly, why you own it and what's the reason behind it as well. And a wealth plan could, of course, include any number of different elements. It might be simply just looking at ways that you can structure your assets in order to minimize your liabilities to tax. It might be planning for your retirement and what you want your life to look like when you retire, or it might be passing assets down to the next generation in an efficient way. Or indeed, we see an awful lot of clients who are perhaps looking to relocate to the UK and the planning that's required to go through that process as well.
Yeah, I bet that's incredibly complicated and does need a holding of the hand, if you like. And how does your role differ when you're working with professionals such as lawyers, for example, rather than the clients who come to you directly?
I'm not sure that it does, really.
Okay, yeah.
I think, if a client doesn't have a tax advisor or a legal advisor, chances are, having spoken to us, they're going to need one.
Yeah.
And if they don't have those people in place, then we would, of course, introduce them to appropriate advisors that can help them in that regard. I think the other element, though, is that from the client's perspective, if we're showing that we can work closely together with their tax advisors, with their legal advisors, we're almost creating for a client that quasi-family office where they know that they have all of the people that are helping them with the different aspects of their life, with their finances, all sat around the same table in a meeting, knowing that we're all pulling in the same direction, and everybody understands what the other is doing, so that there's no element of confusion or mistakes that happen as a consequence.
So they've got the right team working efficiently and supporting as well. Okay. So Say I'm a tax advisor with a high net worth client. What do I do?
Well, probably the first point of contact would be myself.
Okay.
And I would I'd speak to the advisor, I'd speak to them about the client or with the client to establish who would be the best private banker that would be their sort of main relationship. Hand that over, and then the way we work generally is we have specialists like the wealth planning team, the credit team, and that it would be up to the banker to bring in those specialists at the right time.
And what does the process of creating a wealth plan involve? Because it does sound quite complex.
It's certainly not a quick process.
It's not just a pad and a pen and a little list.
Well, sometimes for me it is, but I think really time is the important factor, and we take a lot of time in understanding what a client's circumstances are. Not just in terms of what they own and what they owe and what's their income and what's their expenditure, but more in terms of what's important to them, what are their values in life, what do they want to achieve, what are you going to be doing in 5 years' time? That would be a question that I'd be asking you. And consequently, it's not a quick thing to agree upon.
So this is getting into people's core values. This is getting into the different ways people want to lead their lives and the kind of sort of retirement they might want to have.
Absolutely. And I think, for me to be able to put a plan together, I need to be able to understand a client's values, so that I can almost put myself in the client's shoes and understand how they might feel in certain situations or how they might react in certain circumstances.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's really personalised and bespoke, and I think probably very interesting. Some people want to work till they drop, don't they? There's it's what drives them. They can't imagine not working.
Absolutely, and there is no right or wrong answer. It's really establishing what's important to the individual. But I think then taking it forward, because as you say, a plan could last for 20, 30 or even 40 years, there's an awful lot of calculations that have to go into the plan in the background, and that's where we use financial forecasting or cash flow
Mind
modelling.
reading.
Sometimes, absolutely, sometimes. And I think Anna's probably going to talk a little bit more about cash flow, and how it works. But it really gives us that first opportunity for clients to see in a lot of circumstances what their financial future might actually look like.
So, Anna, you have been called Queen of the Cash Flow Plan. Quite frankly, you need a crown. So we had a great explanation of cash flow planning from you earlier on in the year when we did a client-facing virtual event. And in fact, we're going to put a link to it on here for you. So if you'd like to check it out, you can. But can you give our viewers a quick overview?
Yes, of course. That's quite a title to start with. Queen of the cash flow. So cash flow planning software is a great tool to enable us to portray a client's financial future. Now, this will start with inputting the client's assets, liabilities, their expenditure and their income. But also we can then input the goals and objectives that Adrian spoke about briefly and the timelines that we can then put in to help the client achieve their goals. And from then, the really exciting part, I think, is running some insights such as what return do clients actually need on their investments, and how much could they spend in retirement, which is really insightful, their capacity for loss, and actually their ability to take risk with their investments.
Okay, so it's almost sort of bringing things to life so that a client can really visualise what that might look like or feel like.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and how accurate can you be?
So it's our sort of best assumption of a client's financial future. And obviously we know that the future is not certain. Investment returns, inflation, interest rates are non-linear year on year. So as long as the client understands that these are our best assumptions, no one knows what the future is going to hold. But one of the ways that we can portray a non-linear future for a client is by running stress test simulations such as market crashes. And we can then look at how this will affect the plan in the short, medium and long term.
Okay, right, very interesting. Well, look, thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot in a short space of time, and we'll have links to the videos that we mentioned, the NedGEN LinkedIn group, and details of how to contact Andrew, all in the platform. But don't rush off just yet, because Andrew is staying in the hot seat as we bring in Russ Hayworth, Family Business Advisor and Director of the Quest for Legitimacy. to explore the unique experiences faced by people who come from backgrounds with influential or prominent parents and grandparents, from the immense expectations to the pressure of having to navigate this very extraordinary upbringing. Let's have a look at what this means for your clients and you. So, welcome, Russ. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Andrew, I think I'm going to start with you. So, can you give us a quick overview as to what this is all about, and also explain why it is important to speak to a professional audience about this?
No, absolutely. So the quest for legitimacy, it's about finding your place in the world, and that is relevant to everyone. But it is more pronounced and it has a bigger impact when you're dealing with a family or an individual that is connected to significant wealth or they're prominent. And I think if you're an advisor who looks after high net worth or ultra high net worth clients, then this will affect your clients. And so therefore you have to be aware of it and should be discussing it with relevant people. And I suppose the question behind it, what it all boils down to is, why are people who are part of certain families or whether that's wealth or prominence, with all the opportunity they have, sometimes struggling with life? And I think what the book does and the research gives is a language that enables advisors to actually have those conversations.
Now, I think this is super interesting because, as you say, perhaps from the outside looking in, people are like, well, they've got nothing to worry about, they've got it easy. But then that in itself can be problematic, right? And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming quite a lot of your clients or these high net worth individuals may have come from nothing or may have come from a very different place. So they've understood sort of that hunger and the drive and all the rest of it. And perhaps that's really difficult for the children to be able to connect with.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you've grown up with nothing, then you have that hunger. If several generations down the road, it's been a long time since anyone's had nothing.
Yeah.
You've got very different drivers. And it's that disconnect that causes a lot of problems.
And also, I sort of said earlier in the introduction about the sort of pressure. Not everybody is destined to be massively successful. So I guess in this case, it's that sort of measuring up thing must be quite difficult because all your children are different, aren't they? And some of they all have different strengths as well. So perhaps that's a bit exhausting for those kids thinking, how can I be as amazing as my parents?
Yeah, that's certainly something that we found within the research, is that pressure of how do I measure up was something that was present within the people that we spoke with, irrespective of whether there was an explicit pressure put on by parents or the sort of family business or family enterprise that they existed within. There can be examples that we've seen that are given every opportunity to explore and not have to go into the enterprise or to follow in anybody else's footsteps, but they still feel internally that they have this need to measure up, and that can bring its own pressures, and particularly in the case of what we saw, elements of isolation, because it can leave people feeling as if they're the only ones having to go through this.
Yeah. And then I guess it's natural as well for some children to want to carve out their own path and be different. And I guess that could perhaps even come out as rebellion or doing something completely different, perhaps.
And one of the points is probably worth highlighting. Doesn't have to be at the upper stratosphere of prominence or wealth. The pressures can come from any source for that rising generation, whether it's academia, fame, or success in a certain light. It doesn't have to be that sort of real upper end that are the only people that it applies to.
Interesting. So, Russ, what did your research show are the kind of common challenges being faced by this rising generation?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is that sense of isolation, that feeling of, I'm the only person going through this and I don't know where to go or how to articulate how it is that I feel, that there's this pressure. I've got all this opportunity. I've got this, potentially fantastic lifestyle. And what we're not saying is that it's an inherently negative experience, but it brings with it challenges that perhaps the parents hadn't had to navigate historically. And so recognizing that and being able to kind of highlight that you're not alone in this is a real mission of ours, to try and tackle that isolation that can be felt within there. The other key challenge, I think, particularly when we were talking to the rising generation, was the lack of dialogue the lack of conversation around them as individuals.
Okay.
It was much more about the parent, or much more about the whatever it is that's creating the prominence. So if it's a family business, if it's wealth, a lot of focus is placed on preserving that for all the right reasons, but less so. There's much less focus on the rising gen as individuals in their own right, compared to here's a legacy for you to go and protect.
Understandably, I'm sure many of the parents are like, I've worked this hard for you, I've given you everything, you know, in a really well-meaning way. But yeah, it's understanding that that's not 100% simple. So how do these challenges actually impact succession or inheritance planning?
So again, I think by way of background, my profession of origin before I moved into the work I do now was financial planning and wealth management. So I've been within that environment. So I've seen it firsthand from there and then heard it in terms of the research participants. A lot of the world that deals with inheritance tax, succession planning, or transitions of wealth can be based in logic. There's lots of logical structures and ways that can be utilized to transition wealth or transition ownership of assets. But we are emotional creatures. And so when that logic hits emotion, there can be a bit of a clash, because it makes perfect sense from a professional standpoint, but there's something that doesn't feel right in terms of either intergenerational, so there's not the same level of understanding or same sense of purpose between each generation. And that lack of dialogue around the kind of tricky bit there can really slow things down from a professional advisory perspective. That, you know, why aren't they signing up to it? It makes perfect sense. And it's not necessarily explored in huge depth as to the feelings that exist around that as well.
Okay, so those are some of the quite complex issues. So how can advisors who are watching today start to address these sorts of issues?
The biggest thing I think that's come out of the book, from my perspective, from the advisors we speak to, and for the clients that it may affect, is the fact that there is just a language that the advisors can use to start the conversation with clients. And from what I've seen, sort of the fact that there is that language is a huge relief for the clients. That when and I've witnessed it firsthand, it's relief. It's quite emotional, and I think by having that language, which has only been around since 2017, in their armory, actually gives them a huge advantage in terms of touching on that topic with those people.
So
those clients.
simply acknowledging it,
Exactly.
simply just sort of drawing attention to it.
I think a good example here, we use the language, or Jamie uses the language in the book, of breaking moments or breaking points in people's lives. Now, these are events that we found present within everybody that we spoke with throughout the research, that there were points in their lives where they were going along quite nicely, and then something happens that changes the trajectory. And a prime example on a global scale is the COVID pandemic that we've just experienced. We were going through life, and all of a sudden something came along and kind of threw us off course a little bit.
Just a bit.
Yeah. Part of the benefit that we've seen of advisors adopting that kind of language to raise topics is that it's softer to talk about, well, what are the breaking points or breaking moments that could come up in your life that would impact your inheritance plan or your succession plan or your transition, rather than going, right, we need to talk about death, divorce, disability, all the kind of scary stuff that can have a real impact on that. By using the language of breaking moments, it starts to soften that conversation and welcome the kind of rising gen into that, rather than it being so harsh and kind of direct on, I know we have to talk about these things when it comes to succession and inheritance tax, but the use of language can be really important in terms of how it's positioned.
That's so interesting. And finally, Andrew, I understand that this is something that's generated a lot of interest amongst Nedbank private wealth clients. Do you think that's partly because you're the only people talking about it?
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. I'm not sure we're the only people talking about it, and I'm sure there's more and more as time goes on. But yeah, we thought it was a very interesting topic. On the interaction we've had with our professional partners and clients, it's been huge. So, you know, it's genuine thought leadership from that perspective. So we are definitely going to run with it. You know, we are doing, we're going to be doing a number more of the events in 2024 in respect of it, because we think it's a huge topic and it's got quite a way to go.
Well, it's just sort of communication, really, isn't it? And encouraging that, and then that's always a good thing. So thank you both very, very much. It's been really insightful. And I'm sure also it's given you a lot of food for thought. But now I'm going to hand the reins over to you, our viewers. So thank you so much if you've sent in questions. And for this one, I'm going to welcome back Adrian to join Andrew.
Thank you.
Okay, questions are in, and we're going to be starting with one for you, Adrian, and it is this. Is wealth planning a one-off process, or do you have an ongoing relationship with clients that are referred to you?
Okay, yeah. So obviously, when a wealth plan is established and put in place, that's not the end of the story. One thing I think is for certain that things change. You know, people's circumstances change. They may even change their minds about their goals and objectives. Financial situation will change. I think we all know for sure that tax legislation will change and regularly does. So more than anything, it's important to make sure that you review your wealth plan on a fairly regular basis. So at the bank, what we do is, as part of your regular review meeting with a private banker, they will assess your circumstances, identify whether there's been any changes, and if there has been and it's likely that a wealth plan needs to be updated, then they would come and have a conversation with me. And then we would arrange another meeting with the client and update that plan for them.
So it's definitely not a one-time only, it's an ongoing process. Okay, another one for you, Adrian, please. Clients often come to me with various different pensions. Is that something that wealth planning can help with?
Yeah, I think that's very common. People tend to accumulate various different pensions over their life, over their working lives, as they move from one employer to another. Although with the recent budget, that's perhaps not going to be the case quite so much anymore. But yes, we absolutely will look at all of those pension arrangements. It's a complicated area, that of pensions in the UK. And so we will review everything that a client owns, look for all of the nuances and come up with appropriate recommendations, whether that's to leave them as they are or to consolidate them into one arrangement, or maybe a bit of both. Absolutely, we'll look at all of that.
Okay, good stuff. Right, one for you, Andrew, please. Does Andrew think our lack of understanding of the next generation is part of the problem?
Well, I suppose it depends. I think the biggest issue is more to do with a lack of curiosity. That can be in professional services. You have in terms of the questions that you need to ask to find out about your particular area, you're very well versed in. But it's going slightly outside of there where you think there may be beyond the standard questions, beyond the information that you would need for an official client fact find, so to speak. So it's about increasing the level of curiosity. I think that's probably more required.
Okay,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And then one that I'm going to ask you both. Somebody has said, I'm a family lawyer. If I have a newly divorced client, how could wealth planning help them? Who wants to take that first?
Shall I do that?
Yeah, I think so.
That's probably one of the most important times in somebody's life that they need that wealth plan. Very often we see that people in that circumstance haven't perhaps got any financial education at all, other than knowing that they have a credit card that they can hand over and that's perhaps been taken away. So yeah, there's a very definite need to reevaluate circumstances, which is sometimes difficult in that sort of emotional time. But we very much lead them through the process, trying to reassure them, put that plan in place, understand what it is that their life is going to look like, financially speaking, from here on.
Okay.
And it's probably worth noting we have bankers within the team that specialise in looking after clients that are about to or are going through or have been through divorce. So there's an extra level of empathy I think that's needed to deal with emotional chaos, I think is probably a good
Yeah.
way to describe it.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of, just making sure that they're comfortable at the pace of things that are happening, and they really understand what is happening
Yes, it's
from a
not,
financial perspective.
it's not entirely sort of transactional, is it? It's
Correct.
quite mired in all sorts of emotion. Andrew, one for you. Somebody says, I've seen you've done events for clients on the quest for legitimacy. Are you planning to do anything for lawyers?
Well, that would be yes. I think if you want to know what we've got planned for 2024, please reach out. We will be doing in-person events, online events. So there's a range of things coming. So yeah, please just get in contact. But we are doing more next year.
Excellent stuff. Well, look, thank you so much. I think that is all we've got time for, but we've covered a lot. So if you've got further questions or you want to get in touch with the team, the details will be on the screen shortly. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.